The quiet hum of the electric golf cart was the only warning. It sliced through the humid August afternoon, a sound as distinct in the manicured tranquility of the Summit Creek estates as a siren. Victor Serrano didn't look up from the rosebush he was pruning. He didn't have to. He knew the specific whine of that particular cart, the one with the custom-embroidered seats and the small, imperious flag bearing the HOA's stylized oak leaf logo. It stopped on the common area walking path, a ribbon of crushed granite that ran precisely 10 feet behind his property line. The brake clicked with a sound like a guillotine being locked into place. "Victor." The voice was crisp, polite, and carried an undercurrent of unassailable authority. It was the voice of Clarissa Hensley, president of the Summit Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Victor finished a delicate cut on a spent bloom, letting it fall into the bucket at his feet before slowly straightening up. He turned, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple with the back of his leather glove. Clarissa stood beside the golf cart, one hand resting on its roof. She wore a cream-colored linen pantsuit that defied the oppressive heat, her blonde bob cut with geometric precision. Beside her stood a man in a tight-fitting polo shirt, bearing the logo of Pinnacle Community Management, the firm hired to enforce the community's will. The man, whose nameplate read Dave, held a tablet, his expression a careful study in professional neutrality. "Clarissa, Dave," Victor said, his tone even enjoying the weather. Clarissa did not smile. Her gaze drifted past him, fixing on the far corner of his backyard. "We're conducting a routine compliance review of the common area perimeters," she said, her voice carrying the manufactured weight of official business. "And it's come to our attention that your auxiliary structure is encroaching on the designated view corridor." She gestured toward the shed. It was a modest structure, no more than 10 feet by 12, with cedar siding that had weathered to a soft, silvery gray, and a simple gable roof. It sat neatly tucked behind a mature Japanese maple, its presence more suggestion than imposition. Victor had built it with his father the summer before he passed away. It housed his father's old tools, the smell of sawdust and oil still clinging to the unfinished walls. "My shed?" Victor asked, a deliberate note of placid confusion in his voice. "It's been there for 5 years. It's well within my property line." Dave, the manager, cleared his throat and tapped his tablet. "According to our records, an amendment to the rules and regulations was passed 18 months ago, clarifying the interpretation of CCNR Section 8.4.2, which governs the maintenance of view corridors." He angled the tablet so Victor could see a brightly colored digital map of the community. A thick, red line ran along the common path, and an arrow pointed directly at Victor's lot. "This pathway is classified as a primary view corridor. Any structure on an adjacent private lot that is visible from the corridor and deemed by the Architectural Control Committee to impede the natural aesthetic is subject to review." It was a masterclass in bureaucratic doublespeak, vague, subjective, and utterly weaponized. "Deemed by the committee," Victor repeated softly. "And I assume you're the committee." "I chair it," Clarissa confirmed, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She took a step closer to his property line, her voice dropping to a tone of feigned sympathy. "Look, Victor, we don't want this to be difficult. We pride ourselves on being a community of neighbors. But the rules are the rules. They protect our property values. The shed, a corner of the roofline, is visible from this bend in the path. It's a clear violation of the view corridor's integrity." The humiliation was the point, the public nature of the confrontation, the presence of the management drone, the quiet assertion of power over his private space. It was all part of the performance. This wasn't about a view. He knew it. And he knew, she knew he knew it. Victor took off his gloves, slapping them against his thigh to knock the dust off. He looked from Clarissa's perfectly composed face to Dave's impassive one. He gave them a calm, measured smile. "I believe you'll find the official county plat map tells a different story," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Please send any correspondence to me in writing via the management company. I'll expect to see a formal notice referencing the specific, recorded easement you're claiming." Dave blinked, momentarily thrown off his script. Clarissa's smile tightened at the edges. She had expected indignation, an argument, perhaps a shouted promise to call a lawyer. She had not expected calm, procedural pushback. "Of course," she said, her tone a degree colder. "It will all be handled through proper channels. You'll be receiving a notice." She turned and settled back into the golf cart. Dave gave Victor a curt nod before joining her. The electric motor hummed to life, and the cart glided silently away down the granite path, leaving Victor alone in the sudden quiet of his backyard. He stared at the shed, at the corner of the roofline, barely visible through the leaves of the maple. A notice was coming. The first move in a game he hadn't asked to play had just been made. The interior of the shed was Victor's sanctuary. The air was thick with the ghosts of old projects, the sweet scent of cedar, the sharp tang of mineral spirits, and the faint, metallic smell of cold steel. His father's workbench ran along the back wall, the masonite pegboard above it a meticulous collage of well-worn tools. Each hammer, saw, and wrench was suspended from a hook, its shape outlined in black marker, a testament to a lifetime of order and precision. Victor ran his hand along the scarred surface of the bench, the deep gouges and varnish stains a tactile history of his childhood. He had learned to measure twice and cut once at this bench. He had built birdhouses, repaired bicycles, and, finally, helped his father frame the very walls that now surrounded him. This structure wasn't an auxiliary structure. It was a memorial. To Clarissa. It was an eyesore, a procedural pawn. To him, it was the last tangible thing his father had touched. The thought of dismantling it, board by board, felt like a desecration. Later that evening, sitting in his home office, he pulled up a scanned copy of his property survey on his monitor. He had retrieved it from his files earlier while looking for the warranty on his sprinkler system. The crisp, black lines delineated his lot with legal finality. He zoomed in on the rear property line, the one that abutted the common area. It was a simple, solid line. There were utility easements noted on the side of his property, but nothing at the back. No mention of a view corridor. His phone buzzed. It was his sister, Sarah, her face appearing on the screen via video call, framed by a wall of leather-bound legal books in her Chicago office. "You sound stressed," she said, her lawyerly perceptiveness cutting through his attempt at a casual greeting. He swiveled his chair to face the camera. "Show, he said, the word leaving a sour taste in his mouth. He explained the confrontation with Clarissa, the reference to Section 8.4.2, the absurd claim about a view corridor. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from sibling sympathy to professional analysis. "Okay, first things first. Do not engage with her verbally anymore," Sarah advised, her tone becoming crisp. "From now on, everything is in writing. Email only. Create a paper trail for every single interaction. Second, she mentioned a specific CC&R. Have you read it?" "Years ago, when I bought the place," Victor admitted. "It was a novel." "Read it again. Tonight," she instructed. "And read the rules and regulations and the bylaws. You need to know the exact language she's twisting. The power in these disputes comes from knowing the governing documents better than they do. She's counting on you being ignorant and emotional." She mentioned an amendment about the interpretation of that clause. Victor added, Then, you need to request the minutes from the board meeting where that amendment was discussed and voted on. They are legally required to provide them to you as a homeowner. Look for the vote, who was present, and any discussion. That's where you'll find the weak spots. She paused, her eyes softening. Vic, I know what that shed means to you. That's why you have to handle this with your head, not your gut. Don't give her an excuse to paint you as an uncooperative resident. Be polite, be professional, and be a bigger pain in the neck by following the procedure perfectly than you ever could be by yelling. After the call, Victor found the digital folder from his home purchase. He opened the PDF of the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was 158 pages of dense legalese. He poured a glass of water and began to read, highlighting every section that pertained to architectural control, private property, and common areas. He found Section 8.4.2, a short, vaguely worded paragraph about maintaining aesthetic harmony and preserving natural view corridors where designated on the community plat map. Where designated on the community plat map. Victor switched back to the image of his own survey. There was no designation. He searched the HOA's public website and found a low-resolution community map for marketing purposes. On it, the path behind his house was indeed colored green and labeled Summit View Trail. It was unofficial, a sales tool, but it was likely the document Clarissa was using as her justification. He spent the next 2 hours drafting a polite, formal email to Pinnacle Community Management. Subject information request for lot 72, 114, Summit Ridge Drive. Dear Pinnacle Management, following a conversation today with Board President Clarissa Hensley regarding an alleged violation of CC&R, Paragraph 8.4.2, I am formally requesting the following documents. 1. A copy of the official recorded county plat map for the Summit Creek Estates development, which explicitly designates the view corridor referenced in your community map. 2. A complete and unredacted copy of the Board of Directors meeting minutes for all meetings where the interpretation or amendment of CC&R Paragraph 8.4.2 was discussed and or voted upon within the last 24 months. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Victor Serrano, 114, Summit Ridge Drive. He hit send. The first shot had been fired over his bow. This was his. Fired back with procedural precision. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the fight ahead settling in. This was no longer just about a shed. It was about the quiet tyranny of a neighbor who had wrapped her personal agenda in the flag of community rules. The week that followed was a study in weaponized silence. Victor received an automated email confirming receipt of his request, promising a response within 10 business days, as stipulated by the bylaws. Clarissa's golf cart was conspicuously absent from the path behind his house. There were no more visits, no more passive-aggressive greetings. The neighborhood held its breath, waiting. On the 8th business day, the mail carrier's truck lingered at his curb longer than usual. Victor watched from his office window as the carrier walked to his door, not with a letter, but with a green certified mail receipt card and a rigid 9x12 envelope. This was it, the official escalation. He met the carrier at the door, signed the form with a steady hand, and took the envelope. It felt heavy, laden with consequence. The return address was not the HOA's clubhouse, but the sterile corporate office of Pinnacle Community Management. He closed the door and carried it into the kitchen, placing it on the granite countertop as if it were an unexploded ordnance. He slit the envelope open with a knife. Inside, there was no friendly letter, no response to his document request. There was only a single, cold document. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Formal notice of violation. His name and address were listed below, followed by a detailed description of the offense. Violation. CC&R Section 8.4.2. Maintenance of view corridors. Description. An unapproved auxiliary structure shed located on the rear of Lot 72 has been determined by the Architectural Control Committee to be in violation of the established view corridor along the common area path. The roofline of said structure is visible from the common area, thereby impeding the natural aesthetic of the community. Date of observation, August 15, 2023. Action required. Remove the violating structure from the property. Deadline for compliance, September 22, 2023. 30 days from date of notice. Below that was a paragraph detailing the consequences of non-compliance failure. To remedy this violation, by the specified deadline, will result in a formal hearing before the Board of Directors, after which fines may be levied. Initial fines are set at $100, with recurring fines of $100 per week for continued non-compliance. The document was printed on Pinnacle's letterhead and signed not by Clarissa, but by Dave, the impassive manager. He had become the official arm of her will. They had completely ignored his request for the plat map and the minutes. They were bulldozing forward, following their procedure while stonewalling his. The clock was now officially ticking. 30 days. The threat was no longer a neighborly dispute. It was a documented, legally binding process that, if left unchecked, could end with fines, and eventually, a lien against his home. The cold formality of the letter was chilling. It stripped the conflict of all personality, transforming Clarissa's vendetta into a sterile, bureaucratic process. They were daring him to fight the system. They believed he would, like most residents, be intimidated by the official letterhead and the threat of fines and simply comply. They underestimated him. Victor picked up his phone and dialed Sarah. "It's here," he said, his voice low and tight. "Certified mail." "Don't tell me what it says." Sarah's voice came back, calm and professional. "Read it to me, word for word." He did, when he finished. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "They're playing hardball," she said finally. "They ignored your request for discovery and went straight to the formal violation. That's an aggressive move. It also tells me something." What Victor asked. "They probably don't have the documents you asked for," she said. "The plat map she's referencing likely doesn't exist. They're betting they can force you to tear down the shed before you can prove it." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a misinterpretation of the rules. This was a deliberate fabrication, shielded by layers of process. "So what's my next move?" he asked. "You have a right to a hearing," Sarah said. "You're going to request one, but we're not going to do it tomorrow. We're going to use the time they've given us. They set the deadline for September 22nd. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks gathering our own evidence. You're going to become an expert on the history of your property and this entire development. The fight isn't in their hearing room. The fight is in the public record." Victor looked out the window at the shed. His father's shed. A quiet anger, cold and clear, began to solidify within him. They had made it official. Now, so would he. Armed with his sister's advice, Victor began his counteroffensive through the prescribed channels. He knew that any deviation, any show of temper, would be used against him. He had to be the model resident, the man who only wanted to follow the real rules. His first call was to Pinnacle Community Management. He navigated the automated phone tree until he reached a live person, a customer service representative named Brenda, who sounded both bored and perpetually harassed. "Yes, Mr. Serrano. I have your file open," she said. her typing audible in the background. "You received the violation notice regarding the structure on your lot." "I did," Victor said politely. "And I'm calling to follow up on the document request I sent via email over a week ago. I requested the official plat map and the relevant board minutes. The violation notice I received doesn't address that request." There was a pause, followed by more typing. "Sir, the violation was issued by the board. Our role is to facilitate the notification process. Any dispute you have with the substance of the violation needs to be addressed at a hearing." "I understand that," Victor said, keeping his voice level. "But to prepare for that hearing, I need the documents the violation is based on. Can you please tell me the status of my request?" "That request would have to be approved by the board president before we can release those materials," Brenda recited, the words clearly part of a script. "We will let you know once a determination has been made." "So Clarissa Hensley has to personally approve the release of the evidence being used against me?" Victor asked, the absurdity of it hanging in the air. "We follow the board's directive, sir," Brenda said, her voice flat. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" It was a perfect bureaucratic circle. The management company deferred to the board, and the board was controlled by the one person who had a vested interest in hiding the information. He had hit a wall. His next step was to contact the other board members directly. The HOA website listed 4 of them, besides Clarissa, a vice president, a treasurer, and 2 members at large. He drafted a concise, professional email, attached a copy of his original document request and the violation notice, and sent it to all 4 of them. Subject: inquiry regarding violation. Notice for Lot 72. Dear board members, I am writing to you as a concerned resident. I have received a formal violation notice regarding my backyard shed, citing CC&R FAR 8.4.2. As part of my due diligence, I have formally requested the governing documents that form the basis of this violation, specifically the plat map designating the view corridor and the minutes from the meeting where this interpretation was established. To date, I have been unable to obtain these documents from Pinnacle Management. I believe in transparency and due process. I respectfully ask for your assistance in obtaining these public HOA records so I can properly prepare my response. I trust that you will agree that all enforcement actions should be based on clear, verifiable evidence accessible to all homeowners. Sincerely, Victor Serrano. The responses, or lack thereof, were telling. The treasurer, a man named Bob, replied within an hour with a curt 2-sentence message. Thank you for your email. Victor, all violation matters are handled by the ACC and the President. Please direct your inquiries through Pinnacle. Trina Guzman, a member at large who Victor had seen at meetings but never spoken to, sent a slightly more sympathetic but equally unhelpful reply. Hi, Victor. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I'll ask Clarissa about it at our next executive session. A promise to talk later. A gentle deferral. The other 2 board members did not respond at all. He was being systematically stonewalled. Clarissa had consolidated power to the point where the other board members were either unwilling or unable to challenge her, and the management company acted as her impenetrable administrative shield. They had created a system where the accused had no access to the evidence against them. They expected him to give up, to accept that fighting was more trouble than a shed was worth. He sat back, the frustration a cold knot in his stomach. Sarah was right. The system was rigged. He couldn't win by playing their game in their arena. He had to leave their arena entirely and find a different one they didn't control, one where the rules were not subject to Clarissa Hensley's interpretation. He opened his web browser and typed in the address for the Hamilton County Recorder of Deeds. The fight was no longer in Summit Creek. It was moving downtown. The Hamilton County Administration Building was a formidable block of 1970s brutalist architecture, all concrete and cold efficiency. The Recorder of Deeds office, however, was an oasis of quiet order on the third floor. Rows of metal shelves held massive, leather-bound plat books, and the air smelled of old paper and history. Victor approached the main counter, where a man with a wild halo of white hair and thick glasses was poring over a large map with a magnifying glass. He wore a faded polo shirt and a name tag that read, George. "Excuse me," Victor began. "I need to find the official plat map for a residential development, Summit Creek Estates." George looked up, his bright blue eyes magnified by the lenses. Summit Creek, the one up on the ridge built by Sterling Homes. Wasn't it around 2005? He spoke with the easy authority of a man who had spent a lifetime memorizing the county's geography. "That's the one," Victor said, surprised. "All right, section, block, and lot number. Or the development's official subdivision name," George asked, already turning toward a computer terminal. "Summit Creek Estates, Section 2. George's fingers flew across the keyboard. He squinted at the screen. "Here we are. Recorded May 17th, 2006. Plat book 88, page 32. Let me pull it for you." He disappeared into the stacks and returned a few minutes later with a heavy, oversized book. He laid it carefully on a large, tilted viewing table and opened it to the correct page. The map was a marvel of precise draftsmanship, a web of fine black lines and delicate, hand-lettered text. "There you are, son," George said, pointing a gnarled finger. "All of Section 2. Find your lot." Victor scanned the map, his eyes tracing the elegant curves of the cul-de-sacs. He found Summit Ridge Drive, and then his own property. Lot 72. He leaned in closer, his heart starting to beat a little faster. He traced his rear property line, the one that bordered the common area, marked CA Tract B. The line was clean and unbroken. He scanned the entire perimeter of his lot, then the surrounding common area. There were notations for utility easements along the street-facing side, clearly marked with dashed lines and the letters PUE, Public Utility Easement. But at the back of his property, there was nothing. No dashed line, no note, no mention of a view corridor or any other restrictive easement. Is there any other document that would show an easement like that?" Victor asked, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. "Something filed after the fact." George stroked his chin. "Could be. An HOA can amend things. But to create a binding easement on private property after the sale, they'd need the homeowner to grant it. It would have to be a separate, recorded document. We can search by your parcel number." They spent the next hour searching the county's digital records. They pulled every document ever filed against Lot 72, the original deed from Sterling Homes to the first owner, the deed from that owner to Victor, the mortgage filings, the utility agreements. Nothing. There was no record of Victor or any previous owner ever granting a view corridor easement to the Summit Creek Estates HOA. The HOA's entire case was built on sand. "So," Victor said, leaning against the counter as George printed certified copies of the plat map and his deed. "Their claim has no legal basis. Based on what's in the public record, none whatsoever," George confirmed, stamping each page with an official seal that made a satisfying thud. "What they have is their own internal map, their own rules, and a whole lot of nerve. Happens more than you think. An HOA board gets a little power. They start drawing lines on maps that don't exist anywhere but in their own meeting minutes." George slid the sealed documents into a large envelope. "My advice. You take these to your hearing. You don't show them your hand beforehand. Let them make their case. Then, you calmly show them the official record. Hard to argue with a county seal. Before leaving, on a hunch, Victor asked George about another type of document: HOA meeting minutes. "Oh, we don't keep those," George said with a chuckle. "That's internal governance. You have a right to them as a homeowner, though. State law." "They sent me a copy," Victor said, pulling a folded document from his briefcase, "for the meeting where they supposedly clarified the rule." He unfolded the pages he'd received from Pinnacle after a second. More forceful email. It was a 4-page summary of the board meeting from February of the previous year. He had read it a dozen times. But now, under the fluorescent lights of the county office, he saw it with new eyes. Near the bottom of page 2, under the heading, New Business, was the discussion of Section 8.4.2. A paragraph describing the board's desire to maintain the aesthetic quality of the common areas was followed by a large, conspicuous black box. The text had been redacted. The next line simply read, "The motion to adopt the clarified interpretation passed 4-1. George peered at the document over the top of his glasses. "Well now, that's interesting. They redacted their own minutes. That's not a good look. Makes you wonder what they're hiding in that black box." Victor folded the redacted minutes and slid them back into his briefcase, next to the envelope containing the sealed plat map. He now had the shield of the official record and, potentially, a sword in the form of the HOA's own secretive documents. The investigation had borne fruit. The foundation of Clarissa's case was a lie, and he had the certified, government-sealed proof. He walked out of the county building into the bright afternoon sun, feeling the weight in his briefcase not as a burden, but as ammunition. Armed with the certified plat map, Victor felt a surge of confidence. He believed the truth, presented logically, would prevail. He decided to make one last attempt to de-escalate, to give Clarissa an off-ramp before the conflict spiraled into a formal hearing. He scanned the sealed plat map and attached it to a new email addressed to the full board and Pinnacle management. Subject: follow-up on violation notice for Lot 72. Official plat map attached. Dear board members and management, in preparation for a potential hearing, I have obtained a certified copy of the official plat map for our subdivision from the Hamilton County Recorder of Deeds Office. I have attached it for your review. As you can clearly see, the recorded map for my property, Lot 72, and the adjacent common area Tract B contains no designated view corridor easement. The legal basis for the violation cited in your notice appears to be absent from the public record. Given this new information, I trust the board will see fit to withdraw the violation notice to avoid unnecessary conflict and expense for both myself and the association. I look forward to your prompt response. Sincerely, Victor Serrano. He hit send, hoping the undeniable evidence would force a quiet retreat. He was wrong. Clarissa wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in winning. His email was not an olive branch. It was a declaration of war. And she was about to launch a counterattack. The response did not come from the board. It came 4 days later in the form of 2 separate letters in his mailbox. The first was from the Architectural Control Committee, signed by Clarissa. It was a denial of a routine request he had submitted over a month ago to repaint his exterior window trim. He had requested to use the exact same color, forest green, from the pre-approved community palette. The denial was curt and nonsensical. Request to repaint trim on Lot 72 is denied. The color, forest green, while on the approved palette, has been deemed incongruous with the current aesthetic direction of the Summit Ridge Drive streetscape. You may resubmit with a color from the Earth Tones section of the palette. It was a petty, vindictive display of power. A clear message: I control every aspect of your property. If you fight me on the shed, I will make your life difficult in 100 other ways. The second letter, however, was far more sinister. It wasn't addressed to him. It was a copy of a courtesy notice sent to his next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable. Eleanor Gable was an 80-year-old widow who had lived in her house since the development was built. She was a kind, gentle woman whose greatest joy was her meticulously kept garden. The notice in Victor's box, likely misdelivered on purpose by one of Clarissa's allies, was a punch to the gut. Courtesy notice of potential violation. To Eleanor Gable, 116 Summit Ridge Drive. From Summit Creek Estates, ACC. Unapproved garden statuary. Dear Mrs. Gable, during a recent review of the community, it was noted that a decorative item, stone bird bath in your front yard flower bed, may not be in compliance with ACC guidelines regarding garden statuary. Furthermore, the placement of this item may fall within the newly clarified interpretation of the front yard aesthetic corridor. Please submit an ACC application for this item within 15 days for committee review. Failure to do so may result in a formal violation notice. Mrs. Gable's bird bath had been in her garden for a decade. It was a simple, elegant stone basin that was constantly visited by finches and sparrows. To target it was an act of breathtaking cruelty. But the strategy was clear. Clarissa was isolating him. By attacking his elderly, vulnerable neighbor with a similarly baseless violation, she was sending a message to the rest of the community: Victor is a troublemaker, and his defiance is causing problems for everyone. Fall in line, or you could be next. Victor walked across his lawn and knocked on Mrs. Gable's door. She answered, holding the notice, her hands trembling. "Oh, Victor," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't understand. My little bird bath, I've had it forever." "It's not about the bird bath, Eleanor," Victor said gently. "This is about me. She's trying to pressure you, to scare you into not supporting me." "But what do I do?" she whispered, the fear in her voice palpable. "They're talking about fines. My pension. I can't afford fines." "You're not going to pay any fines," Victor said, a protective anger solidifying inside him. "I'm going to handle this. Let me have the notice. I'll take care of it." He walked back to his house, her notice in his hand. This was the moment the conflict transformed. It was no longer about his shed, his property, his principles. It was about defending a neighbor who was being used as a pawn in Clarissa's vicious game. He now had her official, documented violation against him, and the documented, cruel threat against Mrs. Gable. The hearing was no longer just his defense. It was going to be Clarissa Hensley's day of reckoning. He now understood her motive wasn't just a general desire for control. The fabrication of the map, the vindictive denial of his paint, the cruel targeting of his neighbor, it was all too personal, too focused. This was a vendetta. He didn't know why yet, but he knew with absolute certainty that the fraudulent view corridor had been created for one reason, and one reason only: to give her a weapon to use against him. And she had just handed him a second front on which to fight. Clarissa's retaliation had the desired effect on the neighborhood. A chill descended upon Summit Ridge Drive. Neighbors who used to wave now offered only a tight-lipped nod before quickly looking away. The message had been received: proximity to Victor Serrano was dangerous. Mrs. Gable, though outwardly reassured by Victor's promise to help, became withdrawn. Her customary morning gardening sessions replaced by quick, nervous trips to the mailbox. Victor felt the isolation keenly. It was one thing to be in a dispute with the HOA. It was another to be the neighborhood pariah, the man whose fight was bringing misery to an innocent widow. The pressure was immense. Sarah's nightly calls became a lifeline. "This is a classic intimidation tactic. Vic," she told him, her voice a steady presence against the backdrop of his growing anxiety. "She's trying to break you psychologically before the hearing. Don't let her. Every petty action she takes is another piece of evidence for your file. Document everything. The paint denial, the notice to Mrs. Gable, the change in the neighbor's behavior. Write it all down with dates." The notice of hearing arrived a week later, again by certified mail. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7:00 p.m. in the community clubhouse. The notice included the agenda. His case was listed as violation appeal, Lot 72. It also contained a chilling sentence. Each appellant will be granted 5 minutes to present their case to the board. A digital timer will be enforced. 5 minutes. They were giving him 300 seconds to dismantle a case they had been building for months. It was designed to be an impossible constraint, to force him into a panicked, rambling speech that the board could politely dismiss. He spent the weekend preparing, not a speech, but a presentation. He wasn't going to argue or plead. He was going to teach a class on municipal records. He timed himself, rehearsing the sequence of his evidence, trimming words, honing his points until his presentation was a lean, undeniable narrative of fact. He had 4 key pieces of evidence. 1. The formal violation notice, citing Grager 8.4.2. 2. The HOA's unofficial community map, which he'd downloaded from their website, showing the fictional Summit View Trail. 3. The certified and sealed county plat map, proving the corridor did not exist on his property. 4. The redacted board meeting minutes, which he now saw as his closing argument proof of concealment. But as he rehearsed, he kept seeing Mrs. Gable's tear-streaked face. Winning his own case felt hollow if she was left to twist in the wind. On Sunday evening, a new plan began to form, a riskier but far more powerful strategy. He wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to use his 5 minutes to defend them both. It would be a gamble, potentially diluting the focus on his own case. But it was the right thing to do. He adjusted his presentation, reallocating precious seconds from his own defense to incorporate the attack on his neighbor. The day before the hearing, a small manila envelope appeared on his doorstep. There was no name on it. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. It was a copy of the same page from the board minutes he had. But this one had no black box. The redacted paragraph was there, in plain, damning text. Legal counsel advises that while the board may interpret Paragraph 8.4.2 for common areas, attempting to enforce a view corridor on private lots without a prior recorded easement is legally indefensible and could expose the association to significant liability. Counsel strongly recommends against this course of action. Member Trina Guzman noted counsel's objection for the record. Victor's breath caught in his throat. This was the smoking gun. They knew. They knew it was illegal and unenforceable from the very beginning. And they did it anyway. And Trina Guzman, the quiet board member who had offered him a sliver of sympathy, had been the lone voice of dissent. Someone on the inside had just handed him the kill shot. He now had irrefutable proof of a knowing, willful conspiracy to violate not only the governing documents, but also the law. The second obstacle, the intimidation, the isolation, the crushing time limit, had failed. It had only made him more prepared. And it had flushed out a silent ally. Clarissa thought she was cornering him. In reality, she had been tightening the noose around her own neck. He carefully placed the unredacted minutes into his presentation folder. It would be his final reveal. The clubhouse meeting room was stale with the smell of industrial carpet cleaner and lukewarm coffee. 30 or so homeowners sat in neatly spaced rows of metal folding chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and resentment. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the board of directors. Clarissa was in the center, radiating a serene, presidential authority. To her right sat the treasurer, Bob, and two other members, their faces impassive. To her left was Trina Guzman, who steadfastly avoided Victor's gaze, her hands clasped tightly on the table before her. Dave, from Pinnacle Management, sat at the end of the table, his laptop open, ready to take minutes. On a small stand next to the podium was an old-fashioned overhead projector, its fan humming softly. Beside it, on a separate table, was a small digital kitchen timer with large, red numbers. It currently read WO500. Clarissa tapped the microphone. "We will now hear the appeal from the owner of Lot 72, Mr. Victor Serrano, regarding the violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2. Mr. Serrano, you have 5 minutes to present your case. Dave will manage the time. You may begin when ready." Victor walked to the podium, his leather briefcase in hand. He felt a profound sense of calm. He opened the briefcase and placed a neat stack of transparencies on the podium. The room was silent. No one checked their phones. Every homeowner sat perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the digital clock. "Thank you, Madam President, members of the board," Victor began, his voice even and clear. He nodded toward Dave. "I'm ready." Dave hit the start button. The red numbers on the clock began to descend. 04:59, 04:58. Victor placed his first transparency on the projector. It was a copy of the violation notice. The text appeared, magnified and stark, on the screen behind the board. "This is the violation notice I received," Victor stated, pointing to the screen. "It claims my shed violates Section 8.4.2 by impeding a designated view corridor. My entire presentation will focus on the legality of that single claim." He removed the transparency and replaced it with the next one, the colorful, unofficial community map from the HOA website. "This, I believe, is the map the ACC is using as its basis," he said, tapping the green line labeled Summit View Trail behind his house. "It's a lovely marketing tool. However, it is not a legal document." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air before switching to his third transparency. The room's atmosphere shifted. This was the certified copy of the Hamilton County Plat Map, the official seal clearly visible in the corner. The dense, precise lines filled the screen. "This," Victor said, his voice dropping slightly but gaining intensity, "is the official, legal, and binding plat map for Summit Creek Estates, Section 2, as recorded on May 17, 2006. I invite the board to examine the area behind Lot 72. He used a pen to point. You will find utility easements. You will find property lines. What you will not find is any mention, notation, or designation of a view corridor easement, because one does not exist. It has never existed." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Clarissa's serene expression tightened, the muscles in her jaw flexing. Bob, the treasurer, leaned over to whisper something to her, but she waved him off. "Therefore," Victor continued, his pacing deliberate, "the violation issued against me is based on a non-existent legal claim. It is null and void." He could have stopped there. He had won. But he looked past the board and saw Mrs. Gable in the third row, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. He had another job to do. "But my case is not the only reason I am here tonight," he said, his tone shifting from legal argument to moral appeal. "I am also here because this same fraudulent interpretation of our governing documents is being used to harass and intimidate other members of our community." He placed his fourth transparency on the projector. It was the courtesy notice sent to Mrs. Gable about her bird bath. This notice was sent to my 80-year-old neighbor, Eleanor Gable, threatening her with fines for a bird bath that has been in her garden for a decade. The justification that it may fall within a front yard aesthetic corridor, another fictional boundary based on the same kind of misrepresentation as the one used against me. He turned to face the board directly, his gaze locking with Clarissa's. This raises a critical question for the board. You are now faced with indisputable evidence from the county that the primary justification for these violations is false. You must therefore make a choice. You can either admit the map is a fabrication and immediately withdraw both my violation and the threat against Mrs. Gable, or you can uphold these violations and, in doing so, knowingly and willingly commit to enforcing a policy based on documented fraud. Clarissa's face was a mask of cold fury. The room was deathly quiet. Victor had one last transparency. He slid the redacted minutes onto the projector. I know this is a difficult position for the board, Victor said, his voice laced with surgical precision, especially since the board was warned, in advance, by its own legal counsel, that this action was indefensible. He then placed his final transparency, the unredacted copy, directly on top of the first. The black box disappeared, replaced by the lawyer's damning words. Could expose the association to significant liability. Counsel strongly recommends against this course of action. A collective gasp went through the room. It was utter, complete vindication. He had not only proven his innocence, but he had also proven the board's, and specifically Clarissa's, malice and deceit. Trina Guzman's face went pale as she saw her own name noted for the objection, now public for all to see. Victor looked at the timer. He stepped back from the podium. My time is up. The timer hit 000 and let out a single, shrill beep that echoed in the profound silence of the room. He had used every second. He had presented his evidence. He had defended his neighbor. And he had exposed the rot at the heart of their HOA. He gathered his transparencies and walked back to his seat, the eyes of every person in the room following him. The game was over. The silence that followed the timer's beep was heavier and more absolute than any sound. It was the silence of a truth so undeniable it left no room for argument. Clarissa Hensley sat frozen, her face ashen. The authority she had cultivated for years had evaporated under the harsh light of the overhead projector in less than 5 minutes. It was Trina Guzman who broke the spell. She cleared her throat, and the small sound was like a thunderclap. She looked not at Clarissa, but at the other board members. I move to dismiss the violation against Lot 72, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Second. Another board member mumbled immediately. Clarissa seemed to snap out of her stupor. There is a process to be followed. I call for a vote. Trina interrupted, her voice gaining strength. The room was now buzzing with whispers. Homeowners were turning to each other, their expressions a mixture of shock and anger. All in favor of dismissing the violation, Trina asked, looking down the table. Her hand went up. The hand of the man who had seconded the motion went up, after a moment's hesitation. Bob, the treasurer, slowly raised his. 3-1. The motion carries. The violation is dismissed, Trina announced. She looked out at the audience, her gaze finding Mrs. Gable. I also move that the board issue a formal apology to Mrs. Gable and immediately cease any and all actions related to her property. Second came a chorus of voices from the homeowners in the audience. The vote was a mere formality. The motion passed, 4-0. Clarissa did not vote. She simply stared at the unredacted minutes projected on the screen behind her. A ghost, at her own execution. Now the homeowners, emboldened by the board's collapse, began to speak. "What about the money spent on legal counsel who told you not to do this?" One man shouted from the back. "I want to see the budget. I want to see every legal invoice for the last 2 years," another woman demanded. Dave, the Pinnacle manager, saw the tide turning and began his retreat. He stood up and spoke into the microphone. "Pinnacle Community Management acts at the direction of the Board of Directors. We rely on the information provided to us by the board to be accurate and in compliance with all governing documents. We will, of course, cooperate with any review of this matter." He was already creating distance, protecting his company, and throwing the board under the bus. The meeting descended into procedural chaos. Clarissa, finally finding her voice, banged a small gavel on the table. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared. But no one was listening to her anymore. As people began to file out, they didn't walk in silence. They walked in buzzing clusters, talking, pointing at the screen, and casting furious glances at Clarissa. Several people stopped by Victor's chair to shake his hand or clap him on the shoulder. "Thank you." A woman he'd never met before whispered, "She tried to find me for my son's basketball hoop last year." "You did what we all wanted to do, but were too afraid," an older man said, gripping his arm. Outside, under the pale glow of the parking lot lights, Trina Guzman approached him. Her face was grim but determined. "Thank you, Victor," she said. "You gave me the courage to finally speak up. That wasn't the full copy of the minutes. There's more." She took a deep breath. "I'm calling for a special meeting of the members. The bylaws allow it if 10% of homeowners sign a petition. The sole purpose will be to hold a vote of no confidence and remove her as president." "You'll have my signature," Victor said. "I think," Trina said, looking around at the energized groups of neighbors, "we'll have enough signatures before the night is over." The next morning, Victor received an email from the county recorder's office. It was from George. "Mr. Serrano, I enjoyed our little research project. It reminded me of my early days. A thought occurred to me after you left. Sometimes, when a developer files a plat, they also file what's called a master declaration, or a declaration of covenants. It often includes preliminary site plans, and sometimes even conceptual drawings. Might be worth a look. Just a thought. George." A new thread to pull. The fight for the shed was over. But Victor had a growing suspicion that the fraudulent view corridor was just one symptom of a much deeper disease. The questions from the homeowners about the budget. Trina's hint that there was more in the minutes. George's new lead, it all pointed to something bigger. Clarissa hadn't just invented a rule to spite him. The lie was likely covering up something else. The battle was won. But the war for the soul of Summit Creek had just begun. The petition for a special meeting circulated through the neighborhood with the speed and intensity of a wildfire. Within 48 hours, Trina had signatures from over 60% of the homeowners. The meeting was scheduled, and the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Clarissa Hensley was removed from the board by an overwhelming vote. The board, under Trina's new leadership as interim president, immediately voted to authorize a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances and contracts going back 5 years. Clarissa's reign ended not with a bang, but with the quiet packing of a moving van 2 weeks later. A for sale sign was staked into her perfect lawn. She was gone before the first results of the audit came in. The audit uncovered years of mismanagement and self-dealing. Landscaping and pool maintenance contracts had been awarded without bids to companies owned by Clarissa's relatives, at prices 30% above market rate. Thousands of dollars in administrative fees were completely undocumented. The fraudulent view corridor was revealed to have a financial motive. After all, Clarissa had been negotiating with a high-end landscape architect to redesign the common areas. A project that would have cost the HOA a fortune, and would have been managed by a firm owned by her brother-in-law. The view corridor was step one in a manufactured crisis that would have justified this massive, unnecessary expense. Victor, meanwhile, followed George's advice. He returned to the county office and, with George's help, unearthed the original master declaration filed by Sterling Homes in 2004. It included conceptual maps, marketing materials, and sales documents from the initial offering of the lots. Tucked deep inside a folder of promotional materials was a sales brochure for the premium lots in Section 2. It showed a map highlighting the most desirable properties. Lot 71. Clarissa's lot was listed as having a premier garden view, but Lot 72, Victor's lot, was labeled as the crown jewel unobstructed panoramic ridge view. Flipping through the sales records, George found the initial offer sheets. A potential buyer had put in 3 aggressive, escalating offers on Lot 72, all of which were rejected by the developer in favor of a competing offer. The name on the rejected offer sheets was Clarissa Hensley. That was the final, stunning surprise. The root of her obsession, the source of her years-long vendetta, was not about power or control in the abstract. It was about the land itself. Victor had, without knowing it, bought the one thing she had wanted most, the lot with the perfect view, the one she felt entitled to. She had been forced to settle for the lot next door. For years, she had looked out her window at the view that should have been hers, a view partially and poetically obscured by the very shed Victor had built with his father. Her creation of a fictional view corridor wasn't just an act of petty tyranny. It was a desperate, corrupt attempt to legally reclaim the vista she had lost. At the next HOA meeting, the community voted to adopt a new, simplified set of bylaws drafted by a committee of residents. They asked Victor to run for the new board. He politely declined. "I'm not a politician," he told Trina. "I'm just a guy who wanted to protect his dad's shed." He did, however, agree to chair a new, permanent bylaw and transparency committee, a watchdog group designed to ensure that the power of the board could never again be so thoroughly abused. His first act was to help draft a new rule. All board meetings were to be video recorded and posted on the community website within 24 hours. One sunny Saturday morning, months later, Victor was in his shed, oiling one of his father's old handsaws. The air was cool, and the scent of cedar was strong. From his open door, he could see Mrs. Gable tending to her garden, her bird bath sparkling in the sun, alive with the flutter of sparrows. He could hear the laughter of children playing in the community park down the street. The quiet hum of an electric golf cart passed by on the path behind his house, but it was just a neighbor on his way to the pool. The sound no longer held any menace. His property felt like his own again. The neighborhood felt like a community. He had fought a battle he never wanted. Not with anger, but with evidence. Not with insults, but with the quiet, unyielding power of the truth. He had defended his home, his neighbor, and his peace. And in doing so, he had given that peace back to everyone else. He finished his work, hung the saw back on its pegboard outline, and closed the door to the shed. A quiet monument to a father's love and a son's resolve.